Didn't I just do a video on not buying new gear? This is the new AstrHori Probe Lens. It's an APS-C 18mm macro at f8, and in this video we'll see how it stacks up, the image quality, and if such a niche lens is worth putting in your commercial photography bag. Now before we jump in here, a quick disclaimer. AstrHori didn't sponsor this video. However, they did send me this lens before the release date for this review, and it's available now. I'm really just excited to include some unique and interesting lenses here on the channel. Hopefully this is the first of many, but people always talk about cameras, but it's really all about the lenses. Now I know I don't do a lot of gear reviews, but let's dive into all the specs of this lens, do some tests, look at some sample footage that I got here in the studio, and decide whether or not I would actually put this particular lens in my professional setup. This is the AstrHori 18mm probe lens. It has an f-stop range of f8 to f28, 23 elements in 17 groups. Now I know I'm probably not saying any of these names right, but just bear with me. This is kind of AstrHori's direct response to their major competitor, which is the Venus Laowa or Laowa or however you say that. AstrHori put out a previous probe lens maybe a year or so ago, which was the 28mm f13, but this new 18mm is wider than the Venus 24, and the AstrHori is an f8 to Venus's f14. And this 18mm lens is only $719 at launch, which was a couple of days ago. I know it sounds like a lot of money, but compared to their competition, that's about a third of the price of the Laowa Cine version and about half of their regular version, depending on where you shop. It's a 2:1 macro, providing larger than real life images with a focal distance of a little over 1/4 of an inch, almost touching the lens. The number written on the lens, on the focal ring right here, actually it includes the entire length of the lens, not just the distance from the glass, so you have to measure from the mount. But when you subtract the length of the lens, you're left with about 6mm or 0.23 of an inch, so pretty close. The actual size of the lens will change just ever so slightly depending on the mount that you have, but AstrHori makes this lens for the Fuji X mount, the M43, Sony E, Nikon Z, and Canon RF, L, and EF mounts. It's really well built, nice metal construction, metal lens cap, LED light on the end of it. This end is waterproof, which is great for those liquid shots. This is a manual lens, no autofocus or exposure. The aperture is clickless and pretty silent. Both the focal ring and the aperture are pretty smooth. They both have geared rings for a follow focus if you need to do a pole focus or aperture type shot, which is really nice because the only time I've really ever used probe lenses is on commercial shoots, and it's always on a slider, and I've always had the pull focus. Some people might use this lens for still photography, but I've only ever used it for video, and I think that's kind of how most people will use it. It provides a very unique perspective, almost a miniature view of the world, but with a wide angle of view. It makes the world look really big, which is why it's perfect for food videos. Now, I can't really compare this lens with any other lens that I have, so you're just gonna have to look at the footage and judge for yourself things like sharpness and contrast and colors, stuff like that. I've set up this shot here where the AstrHori is skimming right over the top of the cereal box. I wanna run through the different apertures between f8 and f28. The depth of field of this lens shouldn't be too crazy. It's an 18mm wide angle lens with a maximum aperture of f8. Now, being that it's a macro lens, I suspect that the plane of focus is gonna be pretty narrow. But overall, this is a pretty good setup for a product type shot where labels and logos are necessary and important to capture pin sharp. It's a flat surface and it has some nice text, so it should give us a good look at the image quality, distortion, and just how much is in focus through each aperture. Overall, the lens performed pretty well as far as sharpness. Between f8 and f28, there's a pretty big difference. At f8, the corners are pretty soft. Like I said, a pretty narrow band of focus, which kind of gives it that tilt shift effect. And at f28, it's still pretty out of focus at the corners. However, not as much as I expected. Out of all the apertures, to my eye, f8 and f14 seem to be the sharpest when I look at the text close up, with f22 being the weakest. To tell you the truth, most of the time when I'm filming food, I'll be using this lens at f8. One, I really like the out of focus areas, and two, At f/28, you have to have some pretty powerful lights if you want to modify them with softboxes and grids. This is also a pretty good time to talk about distortion and vignetting. You would think there'd be a lot of distortion. It's an 18mm lens, so I would expect some, but the edges of the box look pretty straight. There's a slight bend, but nothing out of the norm. The text, it's curved, so it's making the surface of the box look bowed, but the edges are straight. However, the vignetting, it's pretty noticeable at the corners. I put it up against my Canon 24mm lens with the same subject. This is not a direct comparison, I know, they're completely different lenses, but side by side you can see the vignette that the AstrHori has. I used the same exposure and the same color grade on the footage of the AstrHori as I did on the Canon footage, and the vignette is pretty noticeable. However, after some further processing to make the 18mm more like the 24mm, you can still see a slight vignette on the 18. Nothing too bad, but it's definitely still there. Previously unseen rare footage of the inside of a cereal box. What will they find? So I've set up another little scene here, this time to test out the LED light array on the end of the lens, this little guy right here. It starts off, it's pretty powerful. Right now for this shot with my lights and stuff, I have the power of the LED light turned all the way down to its lowest setting. At its brightest, you can see it's pretty powerful. And this is at f8, but turned down, it provides a subtle fill light that really works for the inside of this box. Come on. Get out of the box there, light. My only wish is if you could ramp up the brightness of the LED from 0%. You know, it has a nice, I guess, dimmer switch here, but it doesn't go all the way down to 0%. It'd be really nice if you could ramp up from, say, 0 to 20 or 30%, whatever you need it to be set at. It's either on or off. For a clip like this, I would love to have the scene outside of the box without the fill light to get all that contrast. And if the LED ramped up the brightness, you know, as it gets closer to the box, I could get the best of both worlds. I guess I could do 2 passes. One with it on and one with it off, and then in post-production do a cross dissolve or something like that. But it would be nice to have it, you know, in the same shot. Color-wise though, the LED I feel looks slightly warm and green. Maybe it's just my eyes or, you know, maybe my color correction, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. As far as bokeh, I don't think most users are going to be really concerned with creating perfect bokeh balls with this lens. However, I like the smooth, out of focus areas overall. My main concern is flaring. This lens gives off a pretty strong flare, which is, you know, something to be aware of if you plan on doing a lot of backlighting. You might have to flag off the light or, you know, work around it in some way, as a matte box is not really feasible. Although the flare doesn't seem to create too much haze in the image, affecting the color and contrast, more just in the way of beams cutting across the image. Honestly, if you're seeing beams of flare in your image, most likely you're gonna see the light as well. This is a pretty wide angle lens. I had a tough time keeping the softbox out of my image. So unless that's what you're going for, I don't think beams of flare are gonna be too much of a problem. I shot this image with direct backlight just to see if any flare would affect the contrast, and it doesn't seem to be that bad. Here's a side lit shot of the same setup for comparison. To tell you the truth, I don't think it looks wildly different than any other backlit shot that I've made with other lenses. The color on the table is washed out from the reflection of the light, but the food still looks pretty normal as far as contrast and color is concerned. Here it is again compared to the same setup with my Canon 24mm L lens. And after color correction, they look pretty similar to me as far as a wide angle backlit shot goes. You know, other than the vignette I mentioned before. Probe lenses really shine when you place food on either side of them. I've set up my shot here where my lens will pull through these couple of rows of cupcakes. I have my hero in the center and I'm making it snow with some powdered sugar. I'm timing my master sugar sprinkling skills with the lens as it moves from one row to the next. I somehow lost my reel sifter, so I poked a ton of holes in the bottom of this plastic tray. You know, it's working. My slider is moving pretty slow, and I've even ramped the start and stop points. What I've noticed with the last couple of passes is that this probe lens, like every other, and even telephoto lenses, are very prone to picking up the most minute vibration. Any shift in weight, the slider movement, I think me tapping on this tray is enough to cause a shaky shot. In this shot, I actually think the powdered sugar hitting the lens caused little vibrations. So inside DaVinci, I've stabilized the shot after the fact. Although it might be too long of a clip to use in real time, it does look pretty good when you speed ramp it in post. So to sum it up, there's not a lot wrong with this probe lens. I do think that the LED light should be able to go down to 0. I think you should have the ability to ramp up from 0 to wherever you set it at. That way you can have it on parts of the shot that you need it and keep it off parts of the shot that you don't. Like all probe lenses, you still need to buy or have gear that will allow you to get the most out of this lens. If you want to use f/22 or f/28, a few 300 or 600 watt lights at a minimum would be my suggestion. That is, if you want to use the full range of modifiers. My 150 watt video lights here in the studio are just not as powerful as they need to be. You also need a rock solid slider to add the motion that this lens is really used for. You also need to learn to not breathe when recording. That way you don't add any vibration or shake. But this lens has a lot to offer, especially at that price. And it coming in f8 and f11 is awesome because, you know, if I stick to those apertures, I can use the lights that I have here and play around with it in the studio instead of, you know, only when I rent it on set. I love that the aperture and the focus rings come geared. The build quality is great and provides you with a very interesting perspective. And it's really just a fun lens to use. I look forward to making more shots with it. And I think that's what it's all about. But that's it for this video. If you want to find out more about this lens, I placed a link down in the description. Drop me some comments. Let me know what you think of the lens. Is it something that you're going to put in your bag? Is it something that you want to put in your bag? All that good stuff. Give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Man, I need some more coffee.